What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Ace Weekly Podcast. My name is Andrew Evans, and I am your host. If it is your first time listening to the show, welcome to the show. And for all of our Ace Weekly family, allow me to have the pleasure of officially welcoming you all to Season 2 of the Ace Weekly Podcast. I'm really fired up to even start this episode and quite frankly, kick off the new season to our show. If it is your first time joining us, this is going to be a great episode. And I think it will be helpful for, number one, brand new listeners. This is the first time that you're hearing this show, the first time you're getting immersed into this community. And for all of my return listeners, I know there's a lot of questions. I've got a lot of messages over the past couple months of, what's happening to the show, what happened to the show, is it coming back, when is it coming back, what's new with some of the comebacks, and we're going to talk about a little bit of that stuff here today. But for those of you guys that are just joining us for the first time, or maybe it's been months since you've listened to this show, Ace Weekly is a leadership and influence podcast, and our goal with this show is to create a global movement that changes the world. And lots of people want to see change in the world that we live in today. In fact, we are going through a time in history where there's more change happening than almost ever before, both in a social climate, both in a technological standpoint, in lots of many ways, as changes are happening all around the world. And so many people want to see change in the world we live in. But change always starts with you. It starts with you, it starts with me, but it starts with ourselves. A lot of people look to leaders, gurus, politicians, and they look to them for leadership because they want to see them change the world. But it's a big belief of mine that, politicians aren't the people that change the world. Entrepreneurs change the world. Teachers change the world. Regular old people like you and I change the world. It's regular, ordinary people who decide to become extraordinary, who decide to become people that live beyond the culture that has been crafted for our society, and they decide to be what we call a leader, a person of influence, someone that positively impacts the environment around them, their family, their community, their vocation, their city, their country, rather than being the product of their environment, which is what most people are. And that's what this show is all about. And so, by the way, the only way that we can continue towards the direction of creating a global movement is if our listeners do one thing. And this is the very first episode of the show. So I'm really excited to dive in and talk about what we've got cooking in the kitchen here for our Ace Weekly family. But before I do that, I want to let you know that this is not a free podcast. It's not a free podcast. There is a cost. There is a fee associated with listening to this show. And that fee, that cost, is that if you like it, share it. That's it, really, truly. If you get value from this podcast, give some value to somebody else. Meaning, if you listen to this show and you have some ahas, some takeaways, some light bulbs, or it positively impacts you, the way we create a global movement is that when one person is impacted, they take that same experience and go impact somebody else with it. So if you are impacted by the show, our ask of you as listeners is that you pay that forward, and that whether it's sending this podcast to somebody else on a text message, shouting out in the show, for sure right now we're going to have a big push for some new reviews and subscriptions and all that good stuff. But the most important thing is that you're paying it forward and reaching out to someone that in your network, in your family, in your job, in your community, that could also be positively impacted in a similar way if you were. And if you aren't, awesome. And if you don't take away any value, then you don't have to share it. But I know if you're listening to this show, growing in some way, shape, or form is going to be inevitable. This show is not for everyone, but those that are on that trajectory and on that path, we're really, really excited to have you here today. So, season 2, it is finally here. It has finally arrived. And let me rewind for a little bit before I talk about what is coming in season 2. And, during part of this, I want to give you guys an opportunity to tell you a little bit more about my own personal story and my own personal experience throughout 2021. We launched this podcast back in 2018. We started working on the concept for the show back in 2017 during that summer. So it's been a good wild journey in the podcast game and in this world of things. And we stopped the show back in March or April of this past year. And we did that for a couple different reasons, which I'm going to talk about here in just a second. But we did 2.5 years of the show, 80 episodes deep, and we brought on different entrepreneurs, CEOs, athletes, peak performers, and people that have done really well at what it is that they do, to ask them and get inside the mindset, the habits, the skill set behind some of the most successful people and some of the most happy and fulfilled people that exist in our world. And there's going to be a lot more of that to come on the show as well. That is still the vision for the show. That's still the mission. That's still the purpose. So, why take a break? Why take a break? And the answer to that question is really twofold. Number one, when we take a break, and this is maybe a little bit of a marketing tip for some of you guys, sometimes when you are constantly releasing content over and over and over again, going through a interim period without any will create more demand or desire. Just like in an economics sense, or the same reason you have limited edition things that pop up in October or the fall, it creates a higher demand because it's not around all the time. When people know that they can get it at any time, it's always happening, it lowers the demand oftentimes. So, one part of us taking a step back and me taking a break from the show temporarily was to give my chance to do another launch, revamp it up, stock up again on some content, start doing some interviews, and have a bigger and bolder launch in season 2 with a brand new audience on top of our current audience, and really expand the reach of this show because it's going to change the world. That's going to need to continue to happen as well. So, that was part of it. There were some strategic things that we wanted to talk about as a team of where this podcast is going and the direction and what we want to create for it. And I'll unveil a little bit of that stuff to you here today as well. So that was one part of it. The other part, which is, hard for me to be transparent and talk about, is that I needed a break. Personally, I needed a break, not just from Ace Weekly Podcasts or from the show, but I needed a break from a lot of different things. A lot of you guys sent me messages on Instagram or other social media channels and said, hey, what's going on with the show? What's the new episode? Is it still happening? And by the way, if you sent me one of those messages, thank you, because, there was a point in time where I thought about, is this still really on purpose for me? Is this still aligned for me to keep pursuing this? Do people still want this? Aren't there a lot of other podcasts out there? Why can't people go check out and consume somebody else's content? Does it need to be me? And a lot of those messages that I did receive, especially from some people just talking about the way their lives were changed and impacted in such a profound and significant way through listening to the show, it really did inspire me in a lot of ways to keep the podcast going and be excited about the future and direction. But I did take a break from social media. If you were following me, now there's posts going out all the time with a new season launch. But I think I posted once or twice on Instagram since January up until, September. And I was taking a break mentally from a lot of different things. And that was an opportunity for me to really take a step back because, quite frankly, I needed some personal time. And the way this show started, if you go back and listen to season 1, the very first episode, it will give you a sneak peek into the mindset of why we did this. It will also show you how bad I was at this podcasting game when I first started. So, I have that on record for anyone to go back and listen and see how far we went and how far we improved since we originally released this show. But I've changed a lot since we started this show. You know, I have said things inside of this podcast and inside of the show that I don't know if I necessarily agree with today. I don't know if it's necessarily aligned with the current present version of me and who I am and how I want to show up in the world. Some of the things that I've said or suggested or even recommended to people are not necessarily maybe the best advice that I could have given them at the time. And maybe it was. But, you know, one of those things that I've talked about a lot is I always, if you've listened to this show or you know me personally, I preach hustle. You know, I love hustling. I love working hard. I live it. I love it. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Being able to work hard and being able to have that hustle energy, that drive, that ambition, that is great. And by the way, not only is it great, it is a defining attribute between those who create the life that they desire and those who spend most of their time and energy dreaming about what that would be like if it did happen one day. But sometimes you don't need to work harder. Sometimes the answer is not push more, persevere, get determined, don't give up. Sometimes that's not the answer. Sometimes the answer is quit. Sometimes the answer is stop. Sometimes the answer is take a step backwards, because that's the only place you can go if you want to keep moving forward. We are in a really interesting time in the world right now. In the history of humankind on planet Earth, we're in a really pivotal, interesting time. The way social dynamics are going, whether geopolitical, governmental systems, world crises, and just also our technological advances and the way things are changing. Facebook just changed its name to Meta a couple weeks ago. You have the crypto and NFT space blowing up. You have people talking about augmented and virtual reality, Neuralink, all these things that are coming, and they're not going to go anywhere. They're coming here to stay, and it's a really interesting time in our society and world. And a lot of people look at what's going on right now. They look at what's happening in our American government and American politics and our social division that exists not only inside of America, but across the world, this polarity that it seems to be ever increasing on both sides of the spectrum of how polarized as a society we are becoming. And for a lot of people, that brings up a lot of fear. It's kind of scary to be in that. But, my personal opinion is that what's happening right now is we are watching and witnessing one of the fastest rising advancements of human consciousness since the beginning of time. And just like technology, if you know what Moore's Law is, which I talk about on episode number 1 of season 1, technology increases exponentially. Oftentimes, conscious awareness for a collective can increase in a similar fashion. And we are and have been for thousands of years growing like this. And in lots of ways, collectively, we are starting to grow like this. We are starting to grow not linearly, I don't even know if that's a word. We are starting to grow not in a linear fashion, but in an exponential fashion. And what I really believe is happening is I believe we are transitioning into what eventually will be a much more utopianistic, conscious, loving society and world that looks out and takes care of people in a much different fashion than we ever have in the past. If you look at the news headlines, it probably doesn't look like that. I might be sounding like I'm crazy right now, but the reality is that's the direction that we're moving. And if you look at something that's going through a chemical state change from one thing completely into another, when things reach a climactic point, a point of resistance, when they reach an overflow point, when they reach the maximum, when they reach a certain maximum capacity before it transitions into a certain state, chaos evolves. And there's oftentimes a lot of chaos, and this is just science and chemistry, but it happens at the collective level as well. And you guys see, the reason I'm talking about this is because sometimes the forest needs to burn before the new foliage can grow. In order for us to evolve into a different society and culture, that means a lot of our old prehistoric structures that are currently deeply rooted into the foundations of how we operate, they need to go away. And guess what? There's a lot of people with a lot of power that control those structures, that it's in their best interest to make sure that those systems and those old structures, no matter how outdated they might be, do not go away. And so what happens when there's a lot of people that have had power for a long time, they start to lose that power. Well, they start to do everything they can to keep control, and so chaos happens. And the reason that I share this is because what happens at the collective level also happens at the individual level. And sometimes before we can move on to the next level of ourselves, part of us needs to die. Part of us needs to be let go of. So, while we did make a decision to take a break from the show to gear up for season 2, this was also a time for me personally of a lot of life changes and personal reflection. I'll be transparent on the show right now and say that I'm a happy guy. I'm usually filled with vision, passion, and quite frankly, March through July was probably some of the couple hardest months of my life in 2021 this year. I was depressed. I was anxious. I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled in anything that I was doing. In 3 months' time, I lost almost 80% of my net worth in a few months. I had massive problems and challenges, and not 1, 2, or 3, but multiple of my businesses all at the same time. I had a relationship that I really cared about that I had to take a step back from. And, I just started questioning and doubting who I really was. And at that time period, I had to take a step back and evaluate what my priorities were and what my purpose really was in life. And, through going through that experience, I made a lot of life changes. At the time, I felt like I was drowning in uncertainty. I didn't know where I was going to live in a couple months. I didn't know if I was going to be working with this company in a couple months. I didn't know what the state of my relationship was going to be in a couple months. I didn't know if I was going to be killing it financially or if I was going to be in a ton of debt and be pulling out loans just to survive in a couple months. I was drowning in uncertainty at the time, and I left the relationship that was important to me. I ended up leaving the company that I'd worked with for almost a decade. I ended up relocating and moving myself to Tulum, Mexico. And I also decided to pursue a passion of mine that was completely left field from anything else I was doing in my life at the time. And the reason that I'm sharing all of this on the show right now is, number one, I want you all to know, and the reason that I'm sharing all this stuff on the show right now is that, number one, I want you all to know that this shit is real. I am not a guru. I am not a fucking expert at any of this stuff. I am just a regular dude on the same journey that so many other people are on. And that journey is a journey of developing myself into the best version of myself, into the person that I was sent here on this earth to become, and supporting the community around me to do the same. Oftentimes, your victories can be inspiring for people that you lead, but we live in a world where everything is picture perfect, Instagram, that often creates a perspective that the people that you look up to and admire, they don't go through the exact same struggles as you do. That's what a lot of people think. And even if they don't know, even if they know that's not true, I fall into this trap all the time too. I still see people and my friends and other people and other people that I look up to and respect. And oftentimes the outside perspective can seem like they have all their stuff together and they're just good and they never really struggle that much. But the reality is that we do. And that's what makes us human. That's what makes each of us human, is that we all struggle, we all have highs, we all have lows, and we all experience all these different emotions of what it is like to be alive. That's part of living. That's part of the human experience. And so I share with you for number one, to let you know that this is real and this show is real. And I'm still growing and changing and developing. And I'm going to continue to do that. And I hope that you continue to do the same. Second reason I share this is because I know that there's going to be a lot of people out there that are listening to this show right now, and you're in the exact same situation, or a very similar one, or you've been in one in the past, or you're going to be in one in the future. And a lot of times when we get to that point, where we've been growing for maybe some time now, and nothing seems to be clicking, nothing seems to be working out. We're climbing up this mountain, and all of a sudden we get stuck on the side of the mountain, and we want to keep moving forward, but we just feel stuck. No matter which rock we try to jump to or which one we try to grab, our grip seems to lose, and we can't seem to make any progress moving forward. And sometimes when that happens, you need to take a step backwards before you can move forwards. Sometimes when you're on the side of that mountain and you want to go up, and you realize you went maybe 10, 20, 30 feet too far down a path that was not the right path, and it will not lead you to the summit where you want to get to. And the only answer is to walk your butt down that side of that mountain, is to go down a little bit further until you get to the place where you can reset and find a new path that will lead you to the summit. And sometimes you have to make that adjustment multiple times over and over again. But in that moment, the only way you will be moving forwards is to make the decision to head back down. Sometimes you peak at the highest level that the current version of yourself will be able to handle. And until you evolve, you will not get to that next level. And, so this has been a journey for me. This has been a several months process, more than that, of going through some lows and going through some highs and going through a roller coaster, quite frankly. And I will share on this show, maybe 2 or 3 keys of what guided me through this process. Number one, sometimes you get the highest level of that conversion stuff you'll be able to handle until you evolve. So if you can relate, or maybe you can't, but maybe one day you will be, here's a couple things that helped me personally guide myself through this process. The first one, number one, was connecting to my heart and listening to my gut. When the mind doesn't know, the body does. The body keeps score. And a lot of times when there's uncertainty in the mind, when there's stress in the mind, when you're anxious in your system, the heart knows the truth. So much more so than the mind ever will. So connecting to your heart and listening to your heart and asking it for guidance, as well as also listening to your gut and that gut feeling that you have about things. Listen to that voice when it speaks. Number 2 is I evaluated my relationship to fear. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you all. It came as a surprise to me. I really wouldn't label myself as someone that gets afraid easily or, operates from a place of fear or operates from a place of scarcity. That's just not who I believe myself to be or how I, choose to think of myself. And guess what? At a certain point in time, when things were going shitty, I had to take a hard look in the mirror and evaluate my relationship to fear. And one of the things, that I noticed about myself is that I've had this incredible drive, this incredible ambition, this go, go, go type energy that's been beautiful. And it's what's helped me accomplish a lot of what I've accomplished in this world and in this lifetime so far. And when I really sit back and look and think about where did that ambition, where did that drive come from? Was it coming purely from a place of inspiration, or was it coming from a place of fear? Was it coming from a place of scarcity? And regardless of whether I was conscious of it or not, what I found was that there was a part of me that subconsciously felt like I always needed to be doing something. Like I always needed to be working. Like I always needed to be go, 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 because if not, then maybe something will happen, or I'll never reach my goals, or I'll never get to where I want to be, or I won't become the person that I'm meant to become if I don't work my ass off and work really hard. And this is not negating the power of hard work, the power of hustle, the power of, committing to something and chasing after it. Those are still important. And if you want to be successful, you're going to need to have those attributes. But I realized that I had those attributes, and I also had an unhealthy relationship of where those attributes were being created from. It's not the problem was not working hard. The problem was that there was a little piece in my subconscious, in the background of my mind, that made me feel like I had to do that stuff. Like something was going to happen. And this probably came from something when I was growing up and me wanting to not happy. I mean, this is why, by the way, most successful people, they've got a chip on their shoulder. Most people that are self-made millionaires, they didn't come from a lot of money. And a lot of times it's being in that type of environment that drives you to show up continuously for the environment that you're in. And there's probably some elements of that. It doesn't change the fact that a lot of it was not coming from a place of abundance or inspiration, but some of it was coming from fear. Regardless of whether I was consciously aware of it or choose to address it or not, that was what was happening. And, I've had to evaluate my relationship to and really look at, like, what am I afraid of? The third thing was getting counsel and asking for support. So, it's why we always talk about, hey, get mentors, get coaches, get people you can get counsel from. And it's not just like coaches. Like, quite frankly, there's nothing a coach was going to tell me on a call that was going to change the experience that I was having. I needed to be able to go through that experience myself and own it. But asking for support from coaches, from family, from friends, from coworkers, and from God, whatever you believe in, God, the universe, source, there are things beyond you that are in this world that can serve you, that can help you, that can support you. The thing is, people, things, beings, you can't be helped if you're not willing to receive the help. You can't be supported if you're not willing to receive support. And a lot of times, all we need to do is ask for help, ask for support, get to a place of gratitude where you're truly grateful and thankful, and ask for help. Get on your hands and knees. And a lot of times, especially if you're a strong-minded person, we're so mentally strong that we wait till everything falls apart and crumples before we're willing to get on our knees and say, hey, I can't do this alone. I need some help. I need some support. There was a point during this journey where I said, like, screw this. I can't do this anymore. I literally, this is beyond my capacity. I cannot manage everything that's on my plate right now. I can't. I had to come to the reality of that and be willing to receive support. The support wasn't the biggest thing. It was my willingness to be able to receive that from other people, and from my relationship to our Creator. Fourth thing was being willing to jump into the unknown. So connecting to my heart, evaluating my relationship to fear, getting counsel, asking for support, and finally being willing to jump into the unknown. This is the feeling that so many of you all have right now. They're calling this time economically the Great Resignation, because so many people are leaving their jobs. They're leaving their companies. They're no longer happy doing something that they don't really like. It doesn't pay them that well, and they're not even really fulfilled doing it. 2020, I think, and this again is chaos that is creating a lot more awareness for people. And I think a lot of people realize, you know what, as they have to start to returning back to the offices and following these rules, and they're working for people and they just aren't really fulfilled in what they're doing, and they see people making 6 figures a year, the same amount of money they're making, doing stuff that they love and enjoy and having a flexible schedule and freedom. Like, people aren't willing to do it anymore. And so this is called the Great Resignation. But a lot of entrepreneurs have that bug for a while. They have the bug of, I should go out and be doing something different than I'm doing, but I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got goals, I've got to be able to do this, so I can't step away. I can't step into the unknown. It's not possible, right? And you live in a place where the uncertainty scares you. And if you ever want to grow in the most significant ways, you've got to be willing to take that jump. You got to be willing to take the jump and trust that the net will appear there for you. You've got to be willing to step into that uncertainty. And I told you guys earlier on the show, there was a time period where like sometimes a little bit of uncertainty is good. And when there's just a ton thrown at you from every corner, it is overwhelming. I was drowning in uncertainty. And now, guess what? There's a lot of stuff that's still really uncertain in my life, and I couldn't tell you how fired up and excited I am for it. Now there's been a perspective shift. Now, I am owning and understanding that, hey, from more uncertainty comes more possibility. And that is really true. The more uncertainty that exists, the more possibility exists. And so, 6 months ago, I saw it as all this uncertainty and, oh my gosh, I need to make all these decisions. It's weighing down on me. And now I'm in this place of like, I don't call it uncertainty. I just go, oh my gosh, there's so much that's possible right now. I have so many options. There's so many things that I can do. There's so many ways this story can go. I'm fired up. I'm excited. There's so much possibility that exists in the world right now. And those are really 4 things that, help guide me through the process, and maybe some of them help you, maybe some of them don't. But I wanted to share that with you all on the show to, number 1, show you that I am a human being and that I experience the same things that you all experience. I also share this to let you all know that if you're going through this situation right now, when you're in it, it sucks. When you're in a place, when you're depressed, when you're going through a hard time, when you lose someone that you love, when life is really testing you and you're in that tunnel, it seems like there will never be an end and that you will be there forever. But that's just not true. Everything ebbs and flows. The only thing that is constant in this world is that nothing is constant in this world, and everything changes. Everything will come and everything will pass. There will be ebbs and flows forever. And so nothing lasts forever. If you're in it, know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and that there are things that you can do to support yourself through that. And also remember, by the way, that a smooth sea never skilled the sailor, meaning that it is the most challenging times. It is the toughest times. It's the times where we get broken down to our knees, where we experience the most growth. When you're crushing it, you might be happy and fun and, enjoying life. Doesn't necessarily mean you're growing the most during those time periods. You grow the most through challenge, through struggle, through mistakes, through strife. And that's how we develop as human beings. So know that, if you're going through this process, there's other people that you can talk to and there's people that can relate. And know that eventually, whether it's a day, a week, a month, a year, longer, eventually you will get through this. And, we are more than happy and excited to be kicking off season 2 of the Ace Weekly podcast and continuing on this journey with this show. And there's going to be some changes, slight changes, but there's going to be some changes. So I want to announce those to you guys as well and talk a little bit about what's in store for the show and what is to come. Number 1, starting tomorrow, there will be a new series on the Ace Weekly podcast called 5 Minutes of Fire. And you can probably imagine what that series is about or what it's like. It's 5 minutes. Who would have guessed? 5 minutes of fire. That's it. I'm kidding. I'll elaborate a little more. It's 5 minutes of curated, jam-packed content. We often do, this is a longer podcast. I realize, I don't even drive. I've driven my car 5 times in the past couple months. So, a lot of people used to listen to podcasts during, while they were driving, things like that. Not everyone does it anymore. Sometimes the hour-long podcast format is not exactly what everyone needs, but it is really helpful to have when you have the space and time to be able to listen to a show like that. We also want to create a shorter segment in series so that people that are really in love with the show can consume more of it if they'd like. And for people that want a little quick, shorter version with some jam-packed value, maybe some quick, short concepts that can be taught in a very short format, we will have our 5 Minutes of Fire series starting this Friday with the release of the show. And we'll have one or two of those that will be released each and every single week in addition to our normal full-length episodes and podcasts. And some of those will feature me. A lot of them will feature guests that have already been on the show teaching a jam-packed concept, and some of them will feature the guests that have never been featured on the show before. So I'm really excited to bring those to you all. I'm excited to bring you guys a better lineup of guests. Not that our previous season, our first season was an amazing lineup of guests, and we've got really, really exciting guests lined up in the next couple of months that we'll be sharing on the show, some of which are already recorded and we'll be releasing, others of which are soon to be recorded. So we'll have brand new guests being featured here. And also, the point that I made earlier, not everyone listens to podcasts anymore. Not as big as I feel like it's not as big of a community as it used to be, but the people are still out there. It's just not being consumed in that format. So one of the moves that we're making is, if you haven't noticed already, we are on every single social media platform. So we now have, if you follow me at Andrew Evans Official on Instagram or at Ace Weekly Podcast, you'll see short clippets and snips from all of our episodes. Everything has both audio and video for every podcast that we do now moving forward. So that means if you want to go listen to the show and watch it on YouTube, you can do that. There's 10-minute segments on YouTube. There's micro segments on Instagram. We'll have some blog posts. So if you'd rather read the podcast, you can do it in that format. And I definitely encourage you guys, if you haven't done so already, follow me on Instagram at Andrew Evans Official. Follow our podcast at Ace Weekly Podcast, and go check out our YouTube page. And if you want to check out LinkedIn, Twitter, any of that great stuff, feel free to do that too. But those are probably the main ones where we are at right now if you want to connect with us. And the last thing outside of the social media presence is that we want to bring some other ways for people to connect with us on the show. One of those is coming up. If you're listening to the show when it gets released in 4 or 5 days from now, we are running the first ever Ace Weekly event right outside of Tulum, Mexico, here in November. And if you're listening to this later on or didn't get a chance to get a seat at that event, we're going to have more events like that in the future. And just more opportunities for the rest of our Ace Weekly family to connect with each other and experience the show and experience the community in other ways than just the pure podcast format. So that's a little bit about what we've got cooking on this show. I think from this show, in season 2, you're going to hear a lot of the same energy that you loved in season 1, and with some nuanced twist about, essentially bringing in a little bit more consciousness into the podcast and the way that we deliver our messages to our audience here too. So here's what I will say, and I already said this at the beginning, but this is our brand new first episode of season 1, and it's my big ask of you. If you like this podcast, especially the first episode, please send it to a friend. Please send it to someone else that might be able to relate. If you were a listener in season 1 and you're excited for season 2 to launch back up, we don't ask for money. We don't want your financial support. We don't run ads in the show, but we do want to expand this to as many listeners as possible. So please do me a favor. If you haven't done so already, go to the Spotify app or the iTunes app and give us 5-star review or whatever you feel like it's worth. Leave us a review, though. Subscribe to the podcast and check us out on some of the social media platforms at a minimum. And if you took away some value, give that value to somebody else. Reach out to somebody that could benefit from this show, and let's start a movement. Talk to you guys soon.